Before I get into the stories, I want to share something with you that I had a lot of help creating. It's a limited series horror fiction podcast, and it's called Shadows in the Pines. It's a story about a home invasion with a twist. There are 6 episodes, and you'll get a weekly drop starting on Tuesday, July 8th. I had a lot of help putting this together from people like Let's Read, Booze and Booze, As the Raven Dreams, and so many more. Pretty much all of my favorite narrators and writers, and probably some of yours too, are in this series with me. Again, episode 1 drops on July 8th. I'll see you there, but for now, let's get glitchy. Alright, so check this out. Did I walk into the future? Okay, I've only heard of these glitch in the Matrix stories from YouTube videos that read posts from Reddit. I've never really fully believed them, but I always wondered what it would feel like if something like that was real. Well, I think it just happened to me. I was coming back home after a picnic with my friends. I hadn't slept much the night before, and I was planning to cancel, honestly. But I always do that, and this time I really wanted to show up. In the end, I went, and I did have a lot of fun, but the lack of sleep started to hit me hard by about 5 p.m. I took the metro back, and instead of catching an auto home like I usually do, I decided to walk. Thought it might help me beat the sleepiness. The road from the junction has restaurants and grocery stores on both sides and a very familiar path. At one point, I have to take a turn to the right. There's a chicken shop right there, and next to it is a grocery store called Farm Face. So I'm walking, scrolling through cat reels on my phone, when I catch the smell of hens. It's that very nasty, specific smell that always comes from that chicken place. I instinctively look up and, yep, there it is. The cages of chickens are out front, and Farm Face is right beside them, glowing with this bright signage. I remember staring at the sign for a second, trying to remember if I had to grab anything for home while I was there. I was so tempted to get a coffee, but I knew if I gave in, I'd just stay up even longer. I needed a shower, and I needed sleep. That was the plan. So I take the turn. A little ahead is a flower shop. I noticed they were unloading a bunch of plants from a truck, and that caught my attention because they don't always do that. I made a quick mental note to remind my dad about getting new plants for the house. And the smell in that spot is usually like muddy and leaves, this earthy, kind of comforting smell. I kept walking, still scrolling on my phone, and then, out of nowhere, I get the chicken smell again. The flower shop usually smells wet, cold, like muddy green stuff, not like hens. So I look up, and there's the chicken shop and Farm Face again, with the same glowing signage that I just saw moments ago, and the same smell in the same spot. I could feel my heart drop. I already passed this spot. I know this stretch of road by heart, and I know for a fact that I didn't simply turn back. I didn't loop around. I simply kept walking straight home, and yet, there I was again, in the exact same place. I was panicking inside at this point. My heartbeat was loud, and I could literally hear it right in my ears. I was trying to think of a logical explanation, but nothing made sense. I conducted a test to see if I was actually losing it, and I took the same right turn. And sure enough, that same flower shop was unloading the same plants from the same truck. It was the same moment. I have no idea what happened. Maybe I just really was that sleep deprived, but I swear on everything, I did not walk back. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking home. I've walked that road 100 times, and this has never happened before. And honestly, I'm hoping it never happens again. Somebody in the comments says, "It sounds like you somehow went back in time." I know that sounds crazy, but the whole thing is just unusual. I don't think that you imagined it, and I really do believe that you experienced the same thing 2 times. And the OP responds with, "Thank you." I tried to explain the whole thing to my parents, but they just dismissed me. But my best friend, on the other hand, believed me because I know what I saw and what I felt, and what I smelled too. OP says they were genuinely terrified because, for a second, nothing felt real. A piece of pepperoni just phased out of existence right in front of me. Hey guys, I'm genuinely astounded right now. This just happened moments before typing this out, and I still don't know what to think. I was just eating a piece of pizza, a pre-bed snack, nothing irregular. I was standing in front of my desk, chomping away, when I go to bite and I lose a piece tumbling toward the floor. Right before it hit the ground, it just disappeared. I don't know how else to describe it. It blinked, or it was deleted, or however you want to imagine it, but this thing was just there, and a split second later, as it was about to hit my carpet, it just phased out of existence. Yes, my floor is clean, and yes, I searched my entire room, not just the area below my desk. There was even a drop of oil or a stain on the carpet where it would have landed. It would have been very noticeable if it were there. And the weird part was, it was like I noticed a shock in my body, or just this weird, uncomfortable feeling the moment that it happened. I could easily write it off as a reaction to what I saw, and maybe it was, but I swear it felt like the feeling came on at the exact same time as that pepperoni disappeared, not as a reaction to it. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's what my brain was able to put together in the few moments since this has happened. I'm gonna go to sleep now. Maybe I'm just being dumb, and the pepperoni will appear somewhere on the carpet and I'll simply have overlooked it, but I don't think I will though. I'm happy to answer any questions, although I don't know what questions people would have. This person includes an edit that says, "Also worth noting, this occurred in the final minutes of Friday the 13th in my time zone." Spooky. Building appears overnight. I've been waiting to share this for forever. So, I take my mom to a specialist quite often. I know the area really well, and I'm pretty attentive to my surroundings. One day, as I was taking her to her appointment, I see this huge 2-story business that could not have possibly been constructed within 2 weeks. As I looked at this building in disbelief, I thought to myself, where did that building come from? And at the very same moment that I was thinking this, my mother says out loud next to me in the car, "Where did that building come from?" This completely shocked me, not just because this thing appeared out of nowhere, but for my mom to notice this too, as she is quite elderly and has many health issues. And I hope you don't think I'm being mean or anything when I say that. But I could literally change the TV show and she might not notice. But this new building all of a sudden that appears on our route, she did notice. What does that mean? Somebody in the comments asks, do you remember if anything was in its place before? OP responds with, yeah, it was just like the field across from it. Overnight, it was a 2 or maybe even a 3-story storage place. If it wasn't for my mom mentioning what I was thinking in the moment, I would have thought, that's strange, and just let it be. They go on to say, this is the second time I've encountered this, with witnesses, by the way, and it's a wee bit unsettling. A lost earring reappears 500 miles away. I have a pair of earrings that I love, and a few weeks ago, I came home late at night, still wearing both of the earrings, and just went straight to bed. The next day, I woke up with just one earring in, and the other was missing. I searched every corner of my apartment, but I couldn't find it, so I thought that it must have fallen under my bed. I looked under there and completely moved the bed frame, but still no earring. Now fast forward to last weekend, I visited my parents, who live 500 miles away, and my dad handed me something and said that I'd probably lost it the last time I visited. Which, by the way, was 6 months ago, during Christmas. And he handed me my missing earring. He said he found it under my bed in my childhood bedroom. How is that possible? That something disappears at one place and reappears 500 miles away. I'm now happily reunited with my jewelry, although a little confused. Somebody writes back and suggests, it's as if there's a portal from your current bedroom to your childhood bedroom. That's so insane. There are so many strange things happening all around us, and it would be so awesome to figure out how these seemingly impossible things happen, but I'm afraid we'll never know. OP responds with, yeah, the fact that I suspected the earring had fallen under my bed is crazy. It was just the wrong bed. White wine turned into red. A couple of years ago, I was bartending at this really busy brunch spot. We had everything on tap, including red and white sangria. In the middle of a rush, I ran out of red sangria and had no idea how to change the keg since I was new. I asked a coworker for help, and after opening the keg, we realized that it was white wine instead of red. Confused, he checked the other 2 kegs and they were all white wine. We called over a manager, and he shined a flashlight into the keg and confirmed what we were seeing: white wine. He poured some of it into a cup, and it was most certainly white, no doubt about that. Then he called over a second manager just to let them know that somebody had placed white wine across the entire wall instead of mixing white and red like they're supposed to. The second manager looked inside that exact same keg, paused, and said, "No, that's red." We all looked again, and somehow, now it was red wine. My 2 coworkers and I stood there stunned, and we were all 100% sure that we had seen white wine mere seconds ago. It felt like reality literally changed right in front of us. So we all look at each other like we'd just seen a ghost. Nobody could explain it, and we never talked about it again. I only worked there for 2 months, but that moment has always stuck with me, and I still think about it. I witnessed a glitch while playing poker. So, a little about me. I want to maintain anonymity, so I'll just say I live in Las Vegas, Nevada, and I don't want to say which casino I was in, and there's a reason for that. This wasn't just some fluke or a fuzzy memory. I've experienced it more than once. This is the second time that I've had a glitch happen while this particular dealer was dealing. So for that reason, if the dealer somehow has power, I'd prefer he not be aware that I noticed, just as a precaution. So, I'm holding Jack Queen. The flop is 10-10-9, and because I'm open-ended, I'm hopeful to improve to the straight. So the turn comes out, and it's a 7. Great. We both check. The river is a 9, and I now have 2 pairs with a queen high kicker. He tables pocket aces for aces and 10s, and I table my hand. I got nothing. I missed, I say, and I flash my Jack Queen. But without missing a beat, one of the players says, "Hey, you have a straight." And I'm certain that I missed because I was watching the card. I glance back at the board, and the river is in fact an 8 now, not a 9. Not what I just saw seconds before. An 8 makes the straight that I was chasing, and somehow I had just announced that I missed, because in the world that I was seeing, I did miss. I enjoy poker, and I know what I saw. That card definitely changed in my favor. Nobody seemed to realize. Everybody just moved on, but I couldn't. Something deep in me knew that this was not normal. I double-checked my hand before my action. I scanned the board carefully before checking the river, which certainly was a 9. But then it wasn't. It changed. Not while I was looking at it. I didn't see it morph from one number to another. But when I looked back, it had literally changed. I wasn't drunk or high or confused or distracted. My mind was crystal clear. Do you think there are people out there with some kind of power? Or was it just some sort of coincidence? And like I said, this wasn't the first time that this exact dealer seemed to be at the center of something strange. The first time I noticed the same dealer glitch was when 2 players were all in a tournament. A player made a straight, and everyone saw it and even commented on it. But by the river, one of the players' whole cards shifted a value down, destroying the straight. It was like the card morphed when nobody was looking. Even the dealer thought the player made a straight before double-checking. However, that time, I was influenced by alcohol and/or marijuana, so I chalked it up to just, not being sober in the moment and not seeing the card right. But this time, no excuses. I was sober, focused, and watching. I didn't win the tournament, but I did, however, win an unnatural amount of hands in the 30 minutes that this dealer was on the table. Have you ever experienced playing cards changing their value after being dealt face up? Have you ever felt that, reality has seams, and somebody was tugging at the threads right in front of you? Because I think that's what I saw. Twice now, with the same dealer. What happened to my Lana Del Rey hoodie? About 2 weeks ago, I lost my Lana Del Rey hoodie. I had left it on a hook in my room, which is a place that I always put it, so I was sure it was there. And the next day, I woke up, got ready, and I noticed that it wasn't on the hook anymore. I thought that maybe my sister had come into my room and taken it, so I asked her, but she said no, and she even looked confused when I asked. Now, fast forward to last weekend, I went to see my half-sister. Let's just call her Renee. Renee lives in Wales, which is about 4 to 4.5 hours away from me. We don't see each other often because of the distance, and I hadn't been there since last summer. Keep that in mind. Renee works on the boats, and every time I visit, I help her out with work. It's kind of our little tradition. So, tell me why, the literal second I step foot onto that boat and start my shift with Renee, she hands me the same Lana Del Rey hoodie that I had lost. She said, casually by the way, "Oh hey, you must have left this last time you were here." But I hadn't. I know for a fact that I hadn't, because I had just worn that hoodie a couple of weeks ago at home, and then it vanished. Gone, without a trace from my room. There's no way that it traveled 4.5 hours on its own to a boat that I haven't stepped foot on since last year. I even rechecked my photos from a few weeks ago, and there it was. I could see myself wearing the hoodie. How on God's green earth did my hoodie get from a hook in my bedroom to a boat in Wales that I haven't visited in forever? I'm so confused. This doesn't feel like something that you just misplace. It feels like reality actually glitched. Is this a glitch in the Matrix? A person moving in fast forward. One time, I was in class, sitting front row and looking at the board, but with my peripheral view, I could see one of my classmates who was sitting a little behind me, moving in what felt like he was in fast forward. I remember so very clearly seeing him write, talk, fix the glasses on his face, all in 2x speed. It all happened very quickly, and when I turned around to look directly at him, he was back to normal. I could never explain to myself what had happened. All I know is I'm sure the guy was not just moving fast on purpose, because it was completely unnatural and very robotic. Just like when you would imagine somebody being fast-forwarded in a video. Granny's last promise. My grandmother passed away in 2006 at the age of 92. About a week before her death, she promised me that she would contact me from the other side. Granny was devoutly religious, and to my utter annoyance, she was constantly trying to convert me to save me from going to a place that she describes as very bad. And if I didn't change my ways, I would surely end up there. Although we were very close, we would often butt heads on the subject of an afterlife and the fact that I was gambling mine away as though this life was just a wild night at the casino. The way I saw it, hoping for an afterlife was kind of like fishing for minnows while standing on the back of a whale. Although the following story proves nothing, I swear on my grandmother's grave that what I'm about to tell you is true, and it's deeply affected my way of thinking going forward. So, you tell me, did Granny keep her promise, or what? To put things in perspective, it was during May of 2006. I was 12 months into a 13-month course at sea school. Think of it as a trade school for the maritime industry. I was enjoying the last day of a 30-day shore leave in Cape Town, South Africa, by sailing ship. My sea training vessel, the steel-hulled bark Picton Castle, was a 180-foot-long, 3-masted tall ship having departed out of Lunenburg, Nova Scotia a year prior. The captain once said, I don't know much about steel hull vessels, but I know a lot about wood hull vessels, and that's why I sail a steel hull. But I digress. I was one of about 40 trainees with 12 professional crew members from captain on down to ship's cook, bound around the world from Lunenburg, Nova Scotia, Canada. Anyway, on that particular day, it was my grandmother's 92nd birthday. I decided to make a long-distance call from a phone bank at my hostel in Cape Town to the small town of Cairo, Illinois, about 5,000 miles away in the USA. Granny answered after about 6 rings, and her voice sounded a bit feeble. "Hello?" she said, through a crackling connection. "Hi, Granny. It's Brian, your favorite grandson," I said, "calling to wish you a happy birthday." Granny's voice turned jubilant. She says, "Oh, Brian, are you back? Are you gonna come visit me soon? I miss you so much. I'm gonna make your favorite vanilla wafer banana pudding when you get here." I said, "Well, Granny, I'm in South Africa right now, and I don't expect to be back until late June or early July, depending on the weather." "South Africa," she says. "Well, I don't know if I can make it till then, but I want you to go ahead and finish that course so you can get on with your life. Pray for me. This might be goodbye." I knew what she meant when she said that. Granny was old and tired, but not terminally ill. I thought she was being a little melodramatic, as she tended to be at times, so I tried to humor her on the subject. I said, "Okay, Granny, I'll make you a deal. If you feel like you have to go before I get back, I want you to go ahead and let go. But once you get to the other side, I want you to contact me in some way. If you do, then maybe I'll change my ways." Granny was very religious, as I'd mentioned from the offset. She was constantly trying to bring me around to her way of thinking since I was old enough to walk to church. And I'll never forget what she said next. Her answer sounded so intent, so confident, that it sent shivers up my spine. "It's a deal. I will contact you." And that threw me for a loop, so I quickly changed the subject. I told her that I'd be there in about a month, and that I couldn't wait to dig into some of her famous vanilla wafer banana pudding. It felt like a feeble attempt at giving her something to look forward to. I said that, hoping it wasn't the last time that I would hear my granny's voice. We said our goodbyes, and I hung up the phone feeling torn and a little bummed. I went back to my hostel and began packing my duffel bag. I had to get to the ship where I would spend the night before early morning muster. There, we would roll call and be divided up into 3 watches. It was time I got my sea legs back. At 8 a.m. the next morning, and with all hands on deck, we departed Cape Town and then set a course up the west coast of South Africa. Our destination was St. Helena Island. It's a British territory in a remote part of the South Atlantic Ocean. The going was rough that first week, to say the least. For the first 4 days, I was sick as a dog, as was most of the crew. We were only averaging about 5 knots and 20-foot swells, and on the 7th night, this happens. While motoring under storm sails off the coast of Namibia one late afternoon, we got hit by a gale storm with winds approaching 70 miles per hour. The ship was tossed in heavy seas like a rubber ducky in a toddler's bathtub. Fears of sinking absolutely ran through my mind, but the Picton Castle was built sturdy and could handle nearly anything the weather could throw at us. I found out what the captain meant about sailing a steel-hull vessel, but still, the sea has a way of finding out everything that was done wrong. We were wet and haggard by the time our watch was laid below, Then something happened that night that left me feeling very uneasy. Allow me to go into a little more detail. After watch turnover that grueling evening, I had gone straight to my bunk and pulled off my foul weather gear and hung it up by the hatch, dripping wet. I rolled into my bunk and was dead asleep before my head hit the pillow. Then, shortly after midnight, I was suddenly awakened by Granny's voice jolting me out of my sleep like a clap of thunder. It was short and sweet. She simply proclaimed, "I love you." I sat up in my bunk so fast that I banged my head against the bottom of the bunk above me. "Granny?" I half yelped to the pitch-black surroundings, but the only answer was the sound of waves slapping against the hull of the ship and the wispy snoring of my shipmates nearby. I laid on my side, rubbing my head, trying to process what just happened. Her voice rang out with the youth that Granny had when she and I used to have snowball fights when I was a toddler. That was the memory that the sound of her voice brought back to my mind. I dismissed it as a dream, and I lit up my wristwatch to check the time. It was 12:47 a.m., just a few hours before time to go on watch. I rolled over and fell back to sleep instantly. I had all but forgotten about it, as we had much preparation to do prior to our arrival at our next destination in a week or so. There were many hours of ship work and learning to be done, and it would take all of our energies and focus to harness the untamable South Atlantic Ocean. Several days later, we dropped anchor at St. Helena Island right around 9:45 a.m., and then we divvied up the watches for shore time. Luckily, mine was the watch to be let go first. With a few hours to explore, we piled into the skiff and motored up to the dockside, where we tied off and debarked with our backpacks, spending money, and cameras. I felt the urge to give Granny a call. I had invited a couple of shippies to grab a pint and to do a little laundry, which was the usual after stepping foot on terra firma. It had been a couple of weeks since I had a whiff of flowers and foliage. I could even smell the volcanic earth beneath my feet. I walked up the old cobblestone street, scanning the area for a payphone. I found one outside of a pub, and I slid my phone card through the slot. I dialed Granny's number, but after a few rings, it was answered by my sister-in-law, Susan. Now, right away, I got that feeling in the pit of my stomach, telling me that something was wrong. "Hello?" Her voice chimed through a much clearer connection this time. "Susan? Hi, Susan, I didn't expect you to answer. We just arrived on St. Helena Island in the middle of the Atlantic. I'm still about 2 weeks away, give or take. I thought I'd call in and check with Granny. Is she there?" And after a moment of silence, she told me that she had some bad news. Granny had passed away a little past midnight on May 23rd. She went peacefully in her sleep. The doctor said it was of natural causes, and my heart dropped, but still, something told me that she was fine. Susan filled me in on how the funeral went, and I assured her that I would be in contact as soon as I got stateside. I missed Granny's funeral, but at least I could go visit her grave. So, I'd failed to mention earlier that I had kept a journal of my daily life at sea. Usually it's just snippets of events that stood out to me so I could laugh about it later. Upon arriving back aboard ship that evening, I went straight to my bunk and slid my sea chest out from under it. I opened the lid and I took out my leather journal, which was now almost full front to back with entries over the past year at sea. I flipped through the pages to the date of Granny's death, and there it was. Journal entry, May 23rd, 2006. And the last paragraph read, "Had a dream last night that Granny woke me up from a deep, dark slumber. It sounded as though she was right next to my bunk. I even answered her out loud. I thought I might be losing it, as the sea has a way of messing with a sailor's head, and a way of answering questions that the sailor had no desire to ask." End of journal entry. Fast forward about a month later to when I'm at the cemetery with Susan and my brother, who's showing me where Granny's resting place is. There's no headstone. There's just a small, bronze placard inlaid at the head of the grave. It reads, "Emily Pearl Taylor, May 15th, 1994 to May 23rd, 2006. A rare and beautiful soul." I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the single black pearl that I had collected from Mangareva Island for Granny's birthday present. And I made a little hole in the soil next to the placard, and I dropped in the pearl. "I love you too, Granny," I said. "But I'm still not going to convert." Light bulbs. So, tonight, I was trying to get a new light bulb for the lamp on my bedside table, and I walked over to the cabinet where we keep all of the extra bulbs. I took a brand new one out of a complete 4-pack. It was still sealed in the cardboard sleeve, and I had freshly opened it. And I started comparing the voltage and the wattage to the old one that I had just unscrewed from the lamp. And just to be thorough, I set both light bulbs down on the counter so I could keep looking in the cabinet for different options, just to compare shapes and brightness levels and all of that. I even remember the slight clink sound when I set them on the counter. Nothing unusual yet. After rummaging around for a little bit, I looked down at the counter, and there was only one light bulb, the old one. The new one that I had just removed from the pack was gone, completely missing. I stood there for a second, confused, as you would imagine, and I assumed that maybe it had just rolled down or I set it down somewhere. I started checking the cabinet, all over the floor. I even lifted up items that I hadn't touched, like maybe I somehow dropped it and didn't realize, but there was no sign of it. I pulled out the 4-pack of bulbs, thinking maybe I somehow didn't actually take it out in the first place, even though I knew I did. And sure enough, there were only 3 bulbs left in that pack. The new bulb was definitely removed, and it was nowhere to be found. I called in my sister to help look, and she helped me search through all the counters and the cabinets and the trash, and nothing. We both stood there, confused and very weirded out. And then I started to feel it. This creeping, unsettled feeling that made me question reality for a second. I could feel myself literally starting to panic in my own brain, wondering if anything was even real. Like, did I just experience a tiny little crack in the universe? Where did that light bulb go? I have a ruler. You know, the kind you use in math class to make graphs or measure the length of stuff with. I've had it since, well, forever. It came with an edition of a magazine targeted for youths around the mid-1990s or so. I moved to a new flat recently, and while unpacking and sorting out my stuff, I rediscovered the ruler and I put it in an allocated drawer. A few days ago, I was unpacking more boxes, and what do I find? The ruler. Again. I was admittedly perplexed since I remember having already placed it in the drawer when I was packing the first set of boxes. I walked over to the drawer to put this ruler in there, and the original ruler is still there. So now I have two of the same ruler. Great. But it doesn't explain the fact of why I now have two. Why would I, a very money-conscientious person, waste money buying two copies of the same magazine? Well, the answer is I wouldn't. I'm very weirded out. I took a photo of each of them, side by side, just for some proof if you're curious. There are some people in the comments sharing very similar stories that happened to them. Some of them include finding duplicate CDs, or articles of clothing, or even silverware sets. And the OP responds with, wow, all of those are indeed peculiar. What kind of world do we live in where duplicate items just poof into existence? My whole family saw it, and none of us can explain it. So, I let my dog outside one night for his usual evening bathroom break. It was around 10 p.m. It was quiet and chilly. It's the kind of night where you can hear everything. I shut the door behind him like I always do, and I went back into the living room with my family. We were just watching TV, not really paying attention to anything unusual. And a few minutes later, my dog walks into the room from the hallway, just as calm as ever, like he'd never even gone out. But here's the weird part. I, or nobody else, let him back inside. He never came to the door to scratch or bark, which he always does when he's ready to come in. The door had remained shut the entire time. We would have heard him. I immediately got up to check the back door, and it was still closed and still locked. Then I checked every other door in the house. Same thing. Like I said, it was 10 at night, so everything was locked, deadbolted, and pretty much done for the night. There was no way for him to have come in through a different entrance. Our windows were all locked too. Anyway, they were too high for him to reach, let alone jump through, and we definitely don't have a doggy door. He had no muddy paws and no signs of having squeezed through anything. It was as if he'd simply appeared inside the house. And what's even stranger is that my whole family witnessed this too. We all saw him come in from the hallway, and we all just looked at each other, confused, trying to make sense of something that didn't make any sense. Nobody could explain it. He was outside, and then suddenly, he wasn't. Bright flash in a bus in broad daylight. I'm new here, so that's good for me since I don't want people to know that I post here. I won't give the full picture of the town that I live in, but it's in southeastern Europe. It's the weekend, it's cloudy, and I'm on my regular bus with my girlfriend. Suddenly, a very loud bang rocks the bus, and then a very intensive flash fills the bus. The noise sounded like those buses that have metal rods on wires. The trolley bus, I think they're called. Kind of like those rods just fell off or weren't in the right place. This was in the late afternoon, maybe around 5 or 6 p.m., and my girlfriend and I were terrified. But the absurd part is what happened next. The flash lasted for a second or two, but when it ended, the bus continued regularly, just like nothing happened. We looked around, and even the passengers seemed unfazed, like they didn't even notice that loud bang and that bright flash. In fact, I know they didn't because my girlfriend and I were commenting, like, what the F is going on here? Is everyone okay? And the people were looking at us like we just fell on our heads. It's almost like something glitched in the Matrix, and we had this reality reboot. No time was lost, I think. We were too dumbfounded to check, but the rest of the ride was okay. This was in broad daylight. Both of us were sober, no drugs of any kind. We weren't sleep deprived or dehydrated or any other disorder that we can think of. We don't have epilepsy or anything similar. I guess this is just literally a case for the X-Files. This happened a couple of months ago. After asking for permission from this OP to share their story, they gave me some extra details. They say they're a 27-year-old male doing a PhD in natural sciences, so he knows the scientific method pretty well. He knows that his encounter on this bus and other similar encounters from the subreddit blatantly disregard all natural laws that we know of. But that's just it. All he's doing is reporting what he witnessed. He also mentions that his girlfriend is also in the natural science field. They're both sane, no medical history of any mental disorders or anything like that. However, the odd part is, they have conflicting testimonies. In the story, he recollects a loud bang and then this intense flash, but she doesn't remember the bang at all. But she does remember the lights going out for a short time. According to her and her memory, the flash happened, and then everything goes dark for maybe 30 seconds. So while they both experienced something incredibly unexplainable on that bus together, their testimonies don't exactly match up. Do you think they both experienced their own individual glitch in the Matrix? I think I witnessed a car accident twice. This happened to me a couple of years ago. I was biking to work, as per my usual routine, and I was at a crosswalk waiting to cross when I heard tires squealing. I was on my phone, but I managed to look up in time to see a red pickup truck run a red light and slam right into a black BMW on the driver's side rear panel. The black BMW spun violently and nearly flipped into the air. One of the tires was torn off and thrown into a parking lot, which ended up hitting a car. And the red pickup truck, knocked off of its trajectory, sped towards the sidewalk, slamming into a light post. Thankfully, the three people underneath that light post managed to flee before the truck hit them. The impact was so loud and so violent, and there was debris everywhere. And yet, aside from that one car alarm that got hit by that rogue tire in the next parking lot, everything was quiet. I looked around at everyone's stunned faces before my EMT training kicked in. I took a class a few months prior, and while I didn't really pursue that as a career, I did value the training that I received. I immediately took out my phone and I dialed 911 as I told people to check on the driver, but not to move them. I relayed everything that I saw with as much clear information as I could to the female operator on the 911 call. When I heard a man shout out that there's a baby in the black BMW, I could feel my heart twist up in fear and sadness, but I managed to keep my composure, and I looked up to get the street names, and when I looked back for the wreckage, everything was gone. There was no accident. There was nothing. I was back on my bike, on that same regular, boring street, and the 911 call was still going. The operator must have heard my confused expression because I think I muttered something like, "What the cinnamon toast crunch?" And I explained to her that I must have been mistaken, as there was no car accident. She asked if I was okay, and I told her that, yeah, I guess I'm just confused. I apologized, and then right before I was going to hang up, here comes this red pickup truck, barreling through the red light, and then I see the black BMW coming from the other side. and then they collide. Every single detail that I watched was the exact same as the first time I saw it just a moment ago. The 911 operator must have heard the crash over the phone, and I could hear her asking me if there was a car accident just now, and I said yes. And she sent the police immediately after I told her what street names we were on. I stayed on the phone with her for a few minutes as we both tried to figure out what the heck just happened. The operator and I were both very confused, and I think we both decided just to leave it behind us, being grateful that we were on the phone at the time that the crash actually happened. I don't believe in the supernatural, and I for sure would have just dismissed this as a random fleeting thought if it wasn't for the fact that I had a 5-minute call with 911 on my phone. This person includes an edit that says, "I did stick around, and while the mother in the black BMW was pretty beat up, the baby in the back was okay. And the man driving the red pickup truck was drunk, as evident by him trying to run and fight people who held him back, until the police showed up moments later, who cuffed him and took him away." I haven't seen this toy in years. My parents and I moved to the United States when I was 4 years old. I never had much growing up because both of my parents were starting up in an entirely new country. Most of my toys growing up were toys that my dad found at work. He would work on and clean swimming pools, and I would get a lot of the toys that the other kids left behind. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, Hot Wheels and Matchbox cars were my favorite. Probably because my dad found plenty around where he worked. I had this little toy truck with Sheriff on it. It had little lights at the top and just had details that a lot of the other cars didn't. It had some silver parts where the paint was beginning to rub off around the corners. It was probably also one of my favorite ones because it rolled around way better than most of the others. I have very vivid memories of this thing. Then we moved to a nearby town when I was in the 3rd grade. I remember I couldn't find the little truck after that point. I guess it got lost in the move, and life kept moving. Last year, my girlfriend and I purchased our first house together, 2 states away from where I grew up. The original owners agreed to leave this huge sectional couch for us. After the house was ours, we started cleaning and we moved the couch to clean under it. There were a few knickknacks underneath the couch and some Pokemon cards and some other stuff. And after moving the final section of the couch, my heart starts racing when I realize what I've found. I ran to my girlfriend and I started frantically explaining what was going on. The Matchbox car that I played with from 93 to 94 was made in 1983, and this thing was very obscure. And now, all of a sudden, I'm holding that same matchbook truck over 30 years later in this house that we just moved into. Red and white is my favorite color combination. 7 has always been my favorite number. And there's just a few other little oddities that carry throughout my life since I've last seen this exact Matchbox truck. There isn't much more to the story. It is very eerie though, and I've decided I'm never letting go of this toy. I think I died in early July. Do you guys know the whole theory about how when people die in one timeline, they shift into another? I think that may have happened to me. Back in early July of last year, my family and I were going on a road trip to Montana to visit our grandparents. Prior to the trip, I had a horrible feeling about going. I kept having flashes of car accidents in my head, and I was sure that we were going to get in one if we left. It was so strange because I have a pretty severe anxiety disorder, but this didn't feel like my regular anxiety at all. And I never have anxiety about road trips. I actually love them. So we left on the Saturday of that week. I had told my parents that I had a bad feeling about driving up there, but they dismissed me as just being anxious. But I'd never felt so certain about something in my life. Getting into the car felt like signing my death sentence. So we get about 6 hours into the drive, and at this point, I start to think that maybe I was just being ridiculous, and then a wave of calmness starts to wash over me. But that didn't last for long. My dad passes an underpass, and then everything just shifts. I feel like I saw everything in slow motion for a whole 4 minutes or so. My parents were joking beforehand, but their faces moved so slowly, and then the light in the car also started to shift. This was the scary part because I thought I must have been going insane. For a few seconds, there was this huge illumination of light that was coming into our car, and I start looking around at my family, and I couldn't tell who they were or even what they meant to me. And then it's like everything just came back. The light shifted back to normal, and I could recognize everybody in the car with me, and I knew who they were. But it felt like something imperceptible had changed. I closed my eyes and I tried to make sense of the past few minutes. And when I reached back into my mind to try really hard and focus on what had just happened, I started to remember something. I saw blood. I saw our car and another minivan in shambles on the side of the highway right beyond the underpass. And I saw bodies. I remembered sensations that I shouldn't have known. Things like what spattered brain matter looks like, the smell of something burning on the street, the way that I couldn't breathe. But this never happened? I started to remember more vividly that the car in front of us had switched lanes even though there was a truck in front of us. I remember seeing the driver of that car realize it at the last second and hit us with this lateral impact. I have no history of psychosis, and I've never been in any sort of car accident. This wasn't PTSD, and I've never had anxiety over being in the car in any sort of way prior to this. And maybe I could have just brushed it off, but I don't know, I still think about it when I'm driving my own car. And it's made me a more cautious driver as well. I don't know what happened that day. It was just a weird situation. I remember having this distinct feeling in that moment that I had died in some sense. I'm not spiritually sensitive by any means. I'm more of a scientist at heart, but this truly was something that I cannot explain. And I fully accept that I might be reading way too far into this, but, for some reason, I imagined an event that never happened. But I thought I would share it here anyway. Appearing money. I'm not sure if this is the right subreddit for this, but here it goes. About a week ago, I was looking for the title of my car so I could sell it. I have this wooden cigar box on my dresser where I sometimes stash cash or collectible coins or any other assorted doodads. And when I was searching everywhere in the house for this car title, I looked in that cigar box multiple times and nothing of note was in there. Certainly not a car title, and certainly not any spending cash either. I never did find it, and I had to spend $300 on one of my credit cards to replace all of my vehicle titles, which had gone missing. I would be cash broke until I sold this car. I'd been short on pocket cash for a while, actually, so a few days after this, I retrieved a gallon Ziploc bag of loose change that had been in my dresser for a very long time, and I asked my boyfriend to take it to his bank to trade it in for paper money. The coins were originally in a growler, which is a 2-quart glass beer bottle. But probably 2 years ago, I transferred those coins into a bag to take to the Coinstar machine just in case I got in a pinch. And there, the bag sat, untouched. Didn't even look at it for like 2 years. Now, keep in mind, the biggest coin that you can drop into a growler like this is a quarter. Okay, so my boyfriend got back from the bank and was totally shook, and he said he was actually devastated. His bank has a free self-serve coin machine. He said that while he was pouring the coins in, he started noticing that there were solid silver 50-cent pieces getting sucked into the machine. He stopped and tried to grab as many of them as he could. He said he got like 7 of them, but there's no way to know how many actually went down the machine. A theoretical roll of 50-cent pieces holds about 20 of them. I did some research and I found out that those pieces are actually collectible, and they range anywhere from $8 to $40 a piece depending on the year and the mint. But of course, the machine would only count them as 50 cents each. My boyfriend asked the teller if they could retrieve the coins, but they said the machine was contracted by a third party, so nobody that worked at the bank had access to it. What's really weird about this is I have no idea why or how those silver pieces would have been in that bag. My boyfriend is a coin expert and had given me many antique and collectible coins in the past, but there's no explanation as to why I would have put any of them in a bag that was meant for the Coinstar machine. Another few days later, I sold the car and I went to put all the cash that I had made in my cigar box. So as I go to open up the wooden cigar box, the very first thing I see in that box, right on top of everything else, is $570 in cash. That's the exact same cigar box that I had looked in several times a week earlier trying to find my title. I can't even figure out which part of this story is the most improbable, but it sure seems like the universe was trying to give me some extra cash, and it wouldn't take no for an answer. This person includes an edit that says, "For those asking and wondering, no, my boyfriend is definitely not the type to secretly plant money like this. In fact, he's still upset with me that his gift of all of those silver coins somehow wound up in that bag of loose change." My first glitch in the Matrix. Hey everyone. I've been a quiet lurker on this subreddit for a couple of years now. I've always enjoyed the occasional strange or thought-provoking story, but if I'm being honest, I never really believed anything like that could happen to me. I figured that most of these glitch stories had some logical explanation, or maybe even a bit of exaggeration. But now, I'm not so sure. I think I just experienced my first real glitch in the Matrix, and it's been messing with my head ever since. Maybe someone here can offer an explanation, or at least let me know that I'm not alone with this kind of experience. Last year, I bought a 23-foot motorboat, and if you've ever owned a boat, then you know it's a lot of work, especially after winter, to get everything cleaned and inspected and getting ready to put it back in the water. Earlier this spring, I spent 2 full days at the boatyard doing just that. I took down the winter pressing, which is the cover that goes on top. I polished up the hull, I did some minor engine maintenance, and I carefully inspected everything to plan my to-do list for the season. One issue jumped out pretty much right away. and it got me seriously concerned. The teak decking needed some attention. As is common on boats, my decking is made of teak slats with black Sikaflex rubber between each seam. And what I saw wasn't just like wear and tear, it was very obvious and very visible. Several strings had come loose and they were hanging out of their seams. The rubbery strings of Sikaflex weren't just loose in their seams, they were literally hanging out of the seams, kind of looking like spaghetti. And not just on one part of the boat either, but both on the foredeck and the bathing platform at the stern. I remember staring at this, poking at it, and thinking, man, I really need to fix this before any water gets underneath the teak. I looked at it from multiple angles, on several occasions, both of the days that I was there, and I mentally added it to my ever-growing list of projects. I knew this wasn't something to put off. If water got underneath there, it could eventually lead to the entire teak deck needing to be replaced, which would be a huge and expensive job. So, over the following weeks, I did my homework. I read DIY guides, I watched YouTube videos, and I researched the best way to fix these seams properly. I went ahead and I bought the materials, which was marine tape, a caulking gun, Sikaflex scrapers, all of it. It's probably about $100 when it was all said and done, and I was then ready to get to work on it. Last weekend, I went back out to the boat, fully expecting to spend a chunk of the day redoing those Sikaflex seams. I started on the foredeck. I crouched down, ready to assess the damage again, and everything looked fine. Not like somebody patched it up fine, it looked like it had never needed repairs in the first place. The seams were all uniform, they were neat, and they were very well sealed. And there was no sign of any hanging rubber like there was just a week and a half ago. I was confused, but I thought, okay, maybe I just misremembered which part of the boat had the issue. So I walked back to the bathing platform, expecting that to be where all of the loose seams were. Same thing. Perfectly intact Sikaflex. There were no visible gaps. There was no dangling spaghetti-like strings. I crouched down again and I examined the seams up close, trying to find cracks or any signs that something had shifted or resealed itself, but there was nothing. There were no signs of anybody doing any sort of repair, there was no residue, and there was nothing to suggest that the Sikaflex had ever been pulled out or disturbed. And just to be clear here, I don't think this was a case of me just confusing new damage with old wear. What I had originally seen was unmistakable. Those strings of Sikaflex were literally hanging completely down out of their seams, and I checked them multiple times over those 2 days I spent there. I stood there for a while just scratching my head, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Nobody else has access to this boat. I didn't hire anybody to come fix it, let alone look at it. I didn't even tell anybody what was wrong. And it's not like those loose strings could just fall perfectly back into place and rebond themselves, especially without a single crack or seam showing that it ever happened. It's like the issue just never existed, as if I slipped into a slightly different version of reality where my deck was always fine. I still can't explain it. Has anyone else experienced anything like this? I'm open to logical explanations, but it honestly felt like reality just corrected itself. Or that I stepped sideways into another timeline where my deck never had a problem in the first place. I think I just remembered something from another past life. A couple of years ago, I did a past life regression meditation. I saw that I was a young woman in Italy in the 1950s. I was in my 20s, I looked pretty fashionable, and I worked as an illustrator until I was killed in a car accident. I wanted to learn more, but I never really got around to it. My wife is part Italian, and our family used to live really close to a great Italian restaurant where our favorite dessert was their Florentine cookies. So now, it's years later, and today we went to a little market that sold Florentines. We bought a bag, and when I bit into one, I closed my eyes with how delicious they were. It made me think of that past life, and trying to be a little funny, I said, "Oh, they're just like how my mama used to make back in the 40s in Salerno." And then I paused because Salerno just slipped out without me even thinking about it. And I was like, Salerno? Where the heck did that even come from? I don't know anything about Salerno. I don't even know where in Italy that is. Well, my wife looked at me with a grin and said, "You know exactly why you said that." So we looked it up on a map and we started reading about the city. Then we were sitting outside just now, and the name Vittoria just popped into my head. And it wasn't just a fleeting thought, it was like a bold, all capital, Vittoria. So I think I was a young woman named Vittoria that lived in Salerno in another life, or at least grew up there, and I was killed in a car crash in the 50s. Looks like it's time to check newspapers.com. Somebody asks, "Well, did you look it up? What did you find?" OP responds with, "I did spend about an hour or two doing some preliminary searches, but it required some pretty oblique thinking and it wasn't too fruitful, mainly because it's such a specific search for a pretty vague timeline. Most of the car accident news that I saw was about automobile races that just went poorly. I know there are other avenues that I can check, but they'll require more time and attention. I'll keep at it though." This was about 1 month ago, and there's been no updates since. Phantom baby crying. I'm going to admit right off the bat here, I've been a little stressed, but not much more than usual. I got out of the Navy in 2023, and since then I've had 4 deaths in the family, my sister-in-law's wedding, my wedding, 2 cross-country moves, a house renovation and sale, and a honeymoon baby. My husband is also still military, so he got orders across the country, which is the second move. The house we were supposed to rent turned out to be a technically legal but definitely unsafe house, and we had to get out of our lease. And for those wondering, it was missing entire windows, with winter coming. We had exposed wiring all throughout, and the whole thing was very unsanitary. It just didn't feel safe staying there while pregnant. But our stuff was already packed in the moving truck and on the way. We redirected it to storage, and I moved in with my parents while we shifted gears to buying a house instead of renting one. They lived in the same state, but it was about 4.5 hours away from the base. My husband couch surfed with a coworker at this time, and then my parents left for an Australian cruise that they had been planning for a few years. So I was at their place, house sitting / dog sitting for them while they were gone, because what else could I really do? My brother still lives at home, which is actually really fortunate because I suddenly had eclamptic seizures and delivered at 28 weeks. It's about 10 weeks early. Military medical missed my pre-eclampsia, and I had to get a new med evac, and my son was born at 2 pounds, 3 ounces. He's happy and healthy now, by the way. Fast forward about 3 months later. We close on a nice little house, and our son comes home from the NICU. My parents helped us set up the house and settle in. My husband goes back to work, and my parents go home. So here's where things get weird. I can hear phantom crying all the time. It's always distant and a little vague. I ignore it because I'm sleep deprived and it's my first baby, and I just figure it's one of those many mental and physical changes that, people forget to tell you about when you have a baby. The baby monitor motion detector goes off when nothing is in the room. It has a camera, and the screen shows that nothing has changed. I don't really know. I'm not incredibly worried about it in the moment. There are bigger fish to fry. The baby monitor upstairs starts reporting crying while the baby is asleep in my arms downstairs. I check the settings to make sure the mic isn't too sensitive and it's not just picking up a neighbor's lawnmower or something. The baby monitor starts crying on its own. Like, I can hear the crying through the microphone. It sounds just like my son when he's gassy. It's a Wi-Fi monitor, so I change our password just in case, somehow our neighbors had a baby without me knowing, and they've hooked up their baby monitor to our Wi-Fi by mistake, resulting in some kind of interference. What are the odds, but still? I've been dealing with a lovely mental health cocktail of general anxiety and depression of a 20-something-year-old postpartum military-related PTSD, some kind of neurodivergence, and new mother jitters amplified by the NICU experience. During this time, the baby was still eating every 2 to 3 hours, and he had an NG tube, so I just chalked it up to the very rational explanation that I was just a crazy person now. The baby is healthy, and I don't think I can take on ghosts or phantom babies until the next financial quarter. So, I scheduled an appointment with a psychiatrist, and I go on about my life. The other day, my husband comes home early, and my baby and I are trying to start a garden in the backyard. My husband comes out there with us, and he asks why I'm leaving the baby upstairs alone while he's crying. But then, as he finishes that question, he looks over and sees our baby boy right next to me. He's really confused because he definitely heard crying coming from upstairs and from the baby monitor when he walked in the house. And now I'm like, oh, you hear that too? Thank God, I just assumed I was crazy. He went out and he bought a new fancy monitor. Twice. However, we still get that same interdimensional baby crying, but it stops if I stick my head into the nursery and say something like, "You okay, sweetheart? Mama loves you." It's weird, but it's happening less frequently now, and we've simply adjusted. My debit card fell from the ceiling of my car. About a month ago, I had a doctor's appointment and I planned to go to the grocery store on my way home. The night before that, my husband had used my debit card to fill up the car with gas, so I had to grab it out of his wallet. No big deal. I put it in my wallet right away, I kissed him goodbye, and then I hopped in the car. He saw me, by the way, take the card from his wallet and put it in my own. He even mentioned that he was going to do that, but he simply forgot. When I got to my doctor's office, I took my wallet off of my keychain and I dropped it in the center console. I didn't have any pockets, and I don't carry a purse, so I just wanted my key. This is normal for me. This is my regular routine. I didn't do anything weird or new or unique. I get out and I lock my car like normal, and the car starts screaming because my husband's key is in the car and you can't do the touch to lock thing while the key is still in there. So I use my fob and lock it. So I use my fob and I lock it. So I know I locked it. I go in, do my appointment. It's a quick one. I'm probably in and out in 15 minutes. Which was a bit odd, but not anything that I even thought about twice at first. It was just a follow-up on some results that had to be done in person. I go back out to my car, I get in, and it was an uncharacteristically hot day. So before I even shut the door, I start the car, and as soon as I shut the door, something falls from above me down into my lap. I noticed that as it passed in front of my face, I saw that it was blue, so I assumed it might have just been a little sticky note or something. My husband likes to leave me notes, and I'll find them at random times. Maybe it was a post-it note that I hadn't seen on the visor, and my messy bun simply snagged it enough to knock it down or something. But no. There on my lap was my debit card, the same one that I put in my wallet earlier that day, and I only have one debit card. I sat there for a moment, trying to figure out where it could have possibly come from. I checked my wallet, as I think that maybe I grabbed my husband's debit card earlier, but there was no other debit card in my wallet. My visor was down from driving earlier on the way to the appointment, so it wasn't like I weirdly stuck it up there and forgot. I never really put anything in my visor anyway, so this would be way off. I know it came from above me because I watched it fall from top to bottom as it passed my face. My whole wallet was still where I'd left it, in the center console, and nothing was disturbed in my car. Like my glove box wasn't rummaged through or anything, as if somebody broke in. I hadn't done anything different that day, and I've done the same things multiple times since, like moving a card from my husband's wallet to mine, disconnecting my keys and my wallet, tossing the wallet in the middle, starting the car, and you get it. It hasn't happened since. I haven't been able to replicate that experience. But I still think about it every time I get in the car now. How did it get out of my wallet and above me? And why did it even do that? Where was it hiding before I got in? Or did it just poof into the air and fall into my lap? I really don't like not knowing how it happened. Now, this very same person sent me another story that she wanted me to share. She says, my husband grabbed a glass, like one of those clear glass cups, from the cupboard to get a drink. He put ice in it, and then he got water from the fridge. He had been holding it for a moment before taking a drink, but when he did take a drink, one of our house keys was inside that glass, just floating in the water. And it wasn't there when he got the glass, which was upside down in the cupboard, and remember, it was clear, and we're almost positive that it didn't come out with the ice, as that would have been loud and noticeable. We would have heard the key clink around the glass and the ice. And of course, the key could not have come out of the water spout from the fridge either. That's impossible. Also, we don't keep our keys in the fridge. That'd be weird. We still have no idea how this happened, and it happened within a month of that weird debit card incident too. It's so weird. I saw something fly straight into a wall and then disappear. I don't know if this is really a glitch in the Matrix moment, but yesterday, while I was reading a book, a white butterfly with blue-tinged wings flew inside my room from my open window. My cat also saw it fly in, and I saw him gazing at it. I didn't pay much attention to it since I was reading, but I think he was in there for a good 5 minutes or so, just kind of flying around and hovering about my room. Then, it was flying towards me where I was sitting near the wall. I thought it was about to land on me, but instead it headed straight past me to the wall, and then poof, it was gone. So I checked under the carpet near the wall. Maybe it just hit the wall and fell, but it wasn't there. I checked the bookshelf that wasn't too far away from the zone of impact, thinking that it might have landed there, but he wasn't there either. Now, earlier this morning, I checked some other places that it could have landed, but there was no sign of it. I thought that I was just seeing things, but then I remembered that my cat also watched it fly inside, and I watched my cat watch the butterfly for a little bit. Has anyone else also experienced this? Where do you think the butterfly could have gone? It's time for another addition to the No Way files. And just forewarning, this one is the most heady and academic one that I've ever talked about. In February of 1987, a neutrino detector deep underground in Japan picked up something, let's call it strange. For just a few seconds, its sensors registered a burst of subatomic particles, the kind that you'd normally never see. At the same time, detectors in the United States and in Europe recorded the exact same thing. A few hours after that, a new point of light appeared in the southern hemisphere sky. It was a supernova, the closest to Earth in nearly 400 years. They named the supernova SN 1987A, and it changed the way that we study the universe ever since. But 30 years after that, something else happened. And this time, the signal that was recorded didn't come from the stars like before. It came from us. It came from Earth. The burst recorded in 1987 wasn't light or heat. It was neutrinos. They're ghost-like particles that barely interact with anything. I mean, trillions of them pass through my body and your body every second without us ever noticing. Normally, they're impossible to detect. But when a massive star explodes, it floods outer space with these neutrinos. If your instruments are sensitive enough, like the ones in Japan and the US and the UK, and if you're lucky enough, you might catch a few. On February 23, 1987, 3 different detectors did exactly that. Within hours, astronomers observed the explosion of a blue supergiant star in the Large Magellanic Cloud. It's a small neighboring galaxy right next to us, about 168 light years away. About 168,000 light years away. This was SN 1987A, and it became the most studied supernova in human history, and for good reason, because scientists could always see stellar explosions, but this time they felt it, through neutrinos. This event marked the beginning of what's now called multi-messenger astronomy, where we don't rely on light alone to observe the universe, but we also watch for particles and for gravitational waves. But the other thing that happened during SN 1987A that didn't get much attention, at least at first, was that a small set of detectors monitoring radioactive decay noticed a subtle but still measurable shift in their readings. Certain radioactive isotopes seemed to decay faster, at least temporarily, during this neutrino burst. And that, just to put it bluntly, should not happen. Decay rates are considered fundamental constants. That means they don't change. They're used in everything from radiometric dating to nuclear physics. They're not supposed to change, and they definitely shouldn't fluctuate based on something happening in space. At the time, this was dismissed. They called it an instrument error, They called it coincidence, interference. They brushed it off. There wasn't really enough data to call it anything more than that. So the finding was set aside for 30 years. Then comes August 17, 2017. Right before 8:41 a.m. Eastern Time, observatories around the entire world detected a ripple in space-time. This was GW 170817. And what that really is, it's a gravitational wave, GW, produced by the collision of two neutron stars in a galaxy 130 million light-years away. This was the first ever gravitational wave ever to be linked to a visible light source. And then, a short gamma-ray burst followed about 1.5 seconds later. Dozens of telescopes were focused in on this thing. It was a major breakthrough in astrophysics, but that same day something else happened again. At Purdue University, a group of researchers had been monitoring the decay of something called manganese 54. That is a pretty standard radioactive isotope that usually shows no unexpected behavior. It's got predictable patterns and repeatable elements to it. And yet, during that time surrounding GW 170817's arrival, that giant gravitational wave, right, they noticed a deviation in manganese 54. The decay rate shifted. It wasn't, dramatic, and it didn't last very long, but it was still statistically significant. And it mirrored pretty much exactly what had been seen quietly, remember, during SN 1987A 30 years prior. Once again, radioactive decay, which has always been considered to be fixed, unchanged, dependable, right? It appeared to have been influenced by a cosmic event, the same way it did 30 years ago. The team at Purdue, led by physicist Ephraim Fishbach, had been looking into this possibility for years. They had published papers suggesting that decay rates might vary slightly over time, and that solar neutrinos might be involved. However, most of their peers and other physicists didn't agree. But when GW 170817 hit Earth, and the decay rate of that manganese 54 jumped at the same moment, that conversation changed. It was hard for that data to really prove anything, and we certainly didn't rewrite the laws of physics in 2017, but those two events did raise a new question. Here's what we know. In 1987, multiple neutrino detectors picked up a burst from a supernova. That was the first time that had ever happened. At about that same time, at least one set of instruments recorded an unusual shift in radio decay. Fast forward 30 years later, it's 2017, and during the first ever observed neutron-star merger, an almost identical decay shift was recorded again, this time linked to gravitational waves and gamma rays. The timing lined up. In both cases, something reached Earth and appeared to nudge physical systems that should not be touchable, at least not in that way. And just by the way, these were all recorded in lab-controlled environments. They were published in peer-reviewed papers, and they were discussed in scientific journals. But here is where it gets strange, and if you're still listening to this, thank you so much. We're about to get crazy. The shifts in decay rates were not only seen during these major cosmic events, but some researchers also began to notice them during seasonal variations. Tiny little changes that seemed to correlate with Earth's distance from the Sun, which suggests a possible link to solar neutrino flux. Again, this has never been recorded. It should not be possible. Radioactive decay has been considered constant since the birth of nuclear physics. It's one of the few things that we trust to not change, even under extreme conditions. But if these observations are real, and that's still a big if, then it may mean that something about neutrinos or some other unknown particle is actually interacting with matter in a way that we cannot understand right now. Or worse, it means that we're missing a piece of the puzzle that connects space-time and gravity and the structure of matter itself. Well, what's next, right? Today, SN 1987A, that first supernova that I talked about, is still glowing faintly in the sky. It's a slowly fading supernova remnant, and the gravitational wave, GW 170817, marked the beginning of an entirely new way of looking at the cosmos. Both of these events are now considered scientific milestones, but in the background, behind the headlines, there's still this quiet question. Why did the decay rates shift? Was it real? Was it an artifact of some of the equipment maybe faltering? Maybe something that no one caught in the moment? The laws of the universe are not in place to define how things begin and end. That's not what they do. They're in place to define what can and cannot happen. And something clearly happened there that was not supposed to. Twice. This first one is much more of a question than it is a story, but I think it sets the groundwork for what's to come for the remainder of the episode. Have you ever experienced a brief state of consciousness where you realize how crazy it is that anything exists? Throughout my life, I've experienced these short moments. They're usually around falling asleep or waking up or after deep contemplation, where everything would just suddenly look unfamiliar, and it would be accompanied by this intense awe at how anything even exists. It's happened a handful of times, and it only lasts about 5 to 10 seconds, and then things start to feel normal again. I call it a state of consciousness to mostly differentiate it from just thinking about existence that isn't accompanied by this sort of derealization. I mean, it literally feels like, just for a few brief seconds, that you've somehow bypassed some type of software block that doesn't want you to go beyond, and you're quickly pulled back in. It's also a bit scary when you find yourself in this state. Has anyone else ever experienced this? This person includes an edit that says, I want to add that during these experiences, everything else also feels sort of fake. I've been doing some digging, and the closest thing that I can find is what the Buddhists call Satori. And the best description of Satori that I could find is all descriptions are useless, as they only add to the conceptual construct that perpetually keeps you from the experience itself. That said, here's an analogy. Imagine that you're dreaming. You believe that you're awake during the dream. However, once you wake up, you realize the experience that you were having in the dream wasn't real. Not that you weren't having a real experience, but what you were experiencing was in fact an illusion. When Satori is experienced, it feels very similar. What is realized, just as starkly as when you wake up from a dream, is that your waking experience is also an illusion. And what is experienced in this, quote, awakened state is an absolute ground of being that you superimpose an entire conceptual framework upon. I created my boyfriend in The Sims years before I met him. When I was a teenager, living in Vienna, in the small country of Austria, I excessively played The Sims. I created all kinds of families in that game, with all kinds of crazy stories. Most of them were unrelated to anyone that I knew, and they were just straight out of my imagination. As the game got developed to the Sims 4 version, The details got very much on point when it came to creating your Sims. I was always very hesitant to create myself or anyone that I knew because I would feel kind of bad at the thought of somebody that I knew dying in-game. I also didn't want to put anything, out there, if you know what I mean, and attract anything negative. With The Sims 4, though, I finally decided just to bite the bullet and create myself, but I made sure I gave myself a different last name, matching my Sim's husband's last name. The husband that I made looked a lot like 50 Cent. He was my crush at the time, and I was 17. Come on. He was wearing a black tank top, camouflage pants, trainers, and a black watch. My Sim's husband and my Sim's self lived a happy life together. They had kids, and I made sure that they died peacefully because I did believe in attracting situation. I met my boyfriend 2 years ago after I moved to London, and we're in a very happy relationship. One day, we were at a market, and it was really hot out, so I bought a dress so that I could change into something a lot more lightweight, and my boyfriend bought some pants in thin material. He asked me if I liked them, and as I look up to see what he's holding, I noticed that they're camouflage sweatpants. I said yes, and we proceeded to go home. We only lived just a quick walk away, and we changed while we were there. We changed our clothes, and my boyfriend asked me if he looked good. I finished getting dressed, and I looked up at him to check his clothes, and he was wearing those camouflage pants from the market, a black tank top, trainers, and a black watch that I had bought him as a present just a few weeks ago. Pretty quickly, I realized he looked just like my husband from The Sims that I created years ago. I started laughing, and I told him, "You look just like my Sim." And he looked at me with this confused look, and I told him what I mean. He told me, "Oh, okay, so you just attracted me into your life," with a cheeky smile, and I guess he was right. That was my most glitchy moment that I've ever had, but I don't regret it at all. This person includes an edit that adds, "I also remember that I created the husband, and honestly many other husbands for my Sims, with the traits of an artist as I wanted to have nice pictures in the house of my Sims. My boyfriend is an artist himself, and we have loads of pictures that he drew." If this is the Matrix, then they're really paying attention to detail. My husband and I have completely forgotten somebody. So, a year or so back, I had a friend request from somebody on Facebook, and so did my husband. I had no idea who this person was. I didn't recognize her photo, and my husband was in agreement. He confirmed that he had never seen her before and didn't recognize her picture. She had a lot of mutual friends, though, including my father-in-law, so we accepted. But here's the weird thing. She apparently went to the same church, the same youth club, and even a lot of those church events with us. And she's the same age as we are. According to her page, she also went to school with my husband and his sister. Everybody else that we've asked knows her, except for us. I drudged through her Facebook looking for photos of her as a teenager, thinking that might spark something in my memory, but there is no recognition there at all. I literally have no memory of this girl, same as my husband, but she seems to vividly remember us, recounting stories about things that we used to do together. And what's crazy is I remember all of the things that she's mentioning, I just don't remember her. Not long after this friend request scenario, I stumbled upon an old address book that I used to keep, and inside of it, I found her name, her phone number, and her address from that time that we all allegedly used to be friends. And she has photos of us all together too. She seems to be our glitch in the Matrix. Somebody in the comments points out how weird it is that she was already friends with a lot of your mutuals and even your father-in-law before sending you a request. If you guys go back so far and hung out so much, how come you guys weren't friends on Facebook already? OP responds with, I know. It's so strange, good point. And just out of curiosity, I've gone back through her Facebook page where she has photos of her as a child, but I don't recognize that either. Another person adds that she's simply from a different dimension where they were friends. A staircase took me to a place that wasn't part of our building. I'm 22 years old now, but this incident has stayed with me so clearly that I remember it better than most other things in my life. It happened when I was about 17. I wasn't intoxicated or dreaming. I was completely aware and conscious during the entire thing. I had gone to visit my aunt's house with my mom, and she lives in an old government apartment building, the kind that has 5 to 6 floors, with identical and old concrete walls and staircases. Her flat was on the 3rd floor. At one point, I decided to go downstairs to watch some newborn puppies. After watching them, when I started climbing back up, I remember passing floor after floor, but nothing looked familiar. There were no markings, no floor numbers. There weren't even any apartment gates, just the same repeating walls and stairs, one after the other. It felt like I had climbed a lot more than just 3 floors. And then, suddenly, I reached the top of the staircase, and then everything changed. Instead of the usual floor and doors, I saw what looked like an old school hallway. Not the school hallway that we have in Indian high schools, but a long hallway lined with lockers, just like the ones you see in American high school movies. Everything was brightly lit, but completely unfamiliar. And there were kids inside who felt like they weren't Indian, going about like it was just totally normal. I just stood there on the staircase, shocked, staring and wondering what these kids were doing here, and why this old building has something that looks so new and so clean. I remember very clearly this young girl looked at me from inside of the corridor, and she waved or said hi or something, and she smiled like I was supposed to be there. I didn't respond. I felt like I was frozen. And then I slowly turned around and I walked back down the stairs. As I climbed down, the same old staircase returned. The usual old walls and the layout returned as well. And as soon as I passed one more level lower, I was suddenly at the familiar 3rd floor again. Everything was normal. Confused and a little curious, I went back up, and this time, I just found the 4th floor to the apartment. There were no hallways, there were no lockers, no students, no girls were waving at me on this one. I even asked my aunt later if there was a school nearby, or if the building had any sort of renovated section. She said she had no idea what I was talking about, and said no, there was nothing like that. She assumed I was daydreaming, but I know I wasn't. This wasn't a dream. It felt way too real. The lighting, the walls, that girl that waved at me, all of it was so vivid. I still remember every detail. I've had dreams, and I've had hallucinations, And I know what those feel like, and this was not that. This felt like I actually slipped into another version of reality for several minutes. I have no explanation for it, but it happened. And I've never forgotten about it. To be honest, I've never had the courage to discuss it with anybody. They usually just declare me crazy if I go into too much detail. But I want to ask you, was this a time slip? Or some sort of dimension bleed? Or a liminal space event? Or was it something else? If anyone's experienced anything like this, please leave a reply. I'm not crazy. I'm a working man. Somebody leaves a reply that says, "When I hear stories like this, I always say the same thing. Just be glad that you had a round trip ticket. I wonder how often something like this happens to somebody, but it's only a one-way trip and they're never seen or heard from again. I think that this might explain some of the missing persons cases when somebody's there 1 minute and then gone the next, never to be seen or heard from again." "29 years ago, I jumped to a parallel existence after a near-death experience. My heart is already beating fast just thinking about this story. Only those closest to me know that this happened until now. When I was 25 years old, I was driving home from work one night, and at the time, I lived in Los Angeles. I was driving on Sunset Boulevard heading west toward my apartment in Brentwood. And for those that aren't familiar with the area, there's an expanse of sunset near UCLA that's very curvy and very windy. It's 2 lanes on either side, and there's no shoulder to pull off on. It was 8:30 on a Saturday night, and there was some traffic. I was driving along, and then all of a sudden, about 50 feet in front of me, I saw a car, but I was looking at the passenger door. The car had spun out of control, and it was now sitting perpendicular in my lane. I didn't have time to stop. I looked over to my right to see if I could swerve out of the way, but there was already a car right next to me. I had nowhere to go. I instinctively turned my car all the way to the right anyway, and once I had cleared the first car, I spun it all the way back to the left, still trying to avoid the second car. Now, in the middle of all of this chaos happening in the street, I remembered a time when I was little. I was 3 years old, and I was at Disney World with my mom. But this particular memory was one that I've never had before. I did go to Disney World when I was 3 with my mom, and I remember vague parts of that trip, but this specific memory was not one of them. I realized in that moment that my life was currently flashing before me, and I was going to die. I'd never been so sure of anything. Every part of me knew that I was about to die. I remember screaming as I was swerving across traffic, and to this day, I don't know if I actually vocalized my screams and my shouts or if it was all just in my head. But I remember screaming, "No, this isn't fair, I'm not done yet." I suddenly came to a stop, and now I was sitting perpendicular in the opposing lane of traffic. I looked around, and there wasn't a single car anywhere. It was like everything had been wiped clean. I put my car in reverse, I straightened up, and then I proceeded home. And for the rest of the way home, I didn't see a single car. Now, I was only 5 minutes away from my apartment at that point, but Sunset Boulevard on a Saturday night, it doesn't get completely empty like this was. I made it to my apartment, and I parked on the side street. I didn't see a single person either. And while walking to my apartment, I came to the conclusion that I had actually died, and because I said no and fought it for a moment, I was stuck in some limbo. I never wanted my roommate to be home so badly, but unfortunately, she wasn't. I called one of my best friends and I said, "Hey, I need to ask you some questions. Please just answer me and I'll explain later." I asked her what my name was, how old I was, what city we lived in, and the date. Obviously, she was very alarmed. I explained that I thought I was dead and that I wasn't sure that I was even really on the phone with her. And she tried to convince me that I was alive and that everything was in fact okay. There was no mathematical way to escape it. There was nowhere for the car on the right to go. I didn't collide with them. They were just gone. This moment has haunted me my entire life. There have been times when I've questioned my own existence, and I've wondered if my, quote, life since has been a very detailed death trip and I'm actually still lying on Sunset Boulevard, bleeding out. After many years of meditation and spiritual practice and belief in quantum physics, I often find myself wondering what life I jumped into. "3 days after my brother died, he made contact. I'm not sure if this counts as a glitch in the Matrix, but it's going on 6 years since this happened and I still think about it. When my brother passed away, my dad was losing his crap trying to figure out how to tell my grandma. That was my dad's mom. This type of news is hard enough to deliver, and he was stressing even harder about breaking her heart. I volunteered to go with him when he was ready to tell her, in hopes of offering some sort of support for both of them. We didn't call my grandma ahead of time, mostly to avoid questions about why we were coming to visit her in the first place. And when we got to her house, we found that she wasn't home, and so my dad asked a neighbor if he had talked to her today. The neighbor replied with, "Oh, she's at the casino." Typical Bubby. That's what we called my grandma. And of course, I got a kick out of this, but my dad did not. Little backstory here, Dad's an alcoholic. So, he wanted to go to a nearby bar to wait until she got home. Not my favorite idea, but as an adult child of an alcoholic, I've grown to be quite the enabler. So I took him to the bar to drink some pain away. A few drinks later, maybe an hour or so, I decided that we should go back to Grandma's house to see if she's returned home. And at this point, Dad's being kind of a dick, as is tradition. So I get annoyed and I tell him that I'm going to the car. When I leave the bar, I make an immediate left, damn well knowing I parked my car to the right. My dad behind me says, "Hey, where are you going?" But I didn't even respond because I knew I was going the wrong way, but right in front of me was this car. And I'll put a photo up on screen here if you're watching. It blew my mind. Was this a message from my brother? Why did I walk directly to this car, knowing it was in the wrong direction? I was walking towards this car before I even saw what would eventually stop me in my tracks. I couldn't explain any of it, so I snapped a picture of the license plate and I walked across the lot to my car. 9 months later, Dad dies. Really crappy year. And the morning after he dies, it came back to, well, who's gonna tell Bubby? So again, I volunteer, and my grandma is a champ, and I love her so much, so I went with my mom to deliver more bad news. When we get there, we're making small talk, and my grandma says, "You know, I had the strangest dream last night. Tony, who is my dad, came into my room to say goodnight, but he was younger and he was holding a baby, and he was just waving at me from the doorway. I lost it. My mom lost it. And my mom eventually gathers herself and says, "Bubby, Tony died last night. He must have just come to say goodbye." And since then, I've seen a ton of license plates that remind me of my brother and my dad, and I try to take pictures of everyone. Do you think this is just a coincidence? Or is something actually trying to reach out to me? I found something in my pockets that should not have been there. I was taking some stuff out of my pockets today, and in the little tiny watch pocket part of my jeans, I found seashells. Now, I do collect rocks and crystals, and every so often there's a pretty shell that I'll find while I'm out and about, and I'll bring them home. I go to school by the shore, and only a few times have I ever actually taken a shell home with me, because personally, I like to think that most shells should stay in their natural habitat, but I've been out of school for almost 2 months, which means I haven't gone to the shore in that long either, and even then, I haven't even been to the beach in much longer. But these 2 shells that I found in my pocket are very simple, and nothing remarkable about either one of them. So I don't think that I would have seen these particular ones and wanted to take them home. Plus, I've washed these pants multiple times. I think I even washed them yesterday. And I always go through every one of my pockets before throwing them into the washer. I even checked my pockets this morning to put something else in that exact same little pocket, and it was empty this morning. So now I guess I'm just stood here, very confused about how these 2 shells got into my pocket and where they came from. A curious commenter asks, "Well, do you have any children and or a partner that you live with or anybody else?" And the OP responds with, "No, I have no kids, and my partner and I do go to the beach together, but he hasn't been to the beach either in almost a full year at this point. My parents are the only people that I live with, and they haven't been to the beach in years, let alone months. So the mystery remains unsolved." Something on my body switched sides. I feel kind of crazy even posting this, but I need to get this off my chest, and making the internet think I'm crazy versus my loved ones thinking I'm crazy sounds a little less terrible. Basically, skin tags run in my family, and if you don't know what they are, it's like a colorless mole type of thing that sort of hangs off your skin. They can be pretty big, but mine are really tiny, like they're smaller than the tip of a ballpoint pen. I have one under one of my breasts, one between them, and then 2 on my neck, and I've basically had them my whole life. The ones on my neck have always been on my right side. I've always rubbed my fingertips over them and lightly gripped them between my fingertips and then gently pulled them when I'm watching TV or reading a book. You get the picture. It's just one of those absent-minded actions. A couple of weeks ago, I woke up and the right side of my neck around my 2 skin tags was sore as my tank top straps had been pushed pretty hard into them all night. I even remember telling my husband about how they were sore and that I needed to remember to make an appointment to get them removed, which, of course, I've been saying for years. I even asked him to take a look for me, and he said it was just a little red. He mentioned the skin tags. Totally normal encounter, acknowledging these things that have been on my neck for nearly my whole life. So, anyway, since the area started hurting a couple weeks back, I've been messing with them a lot more lately. I reached up looking to nervously feel them, and they weren't there anymore. I was in the middle of something, so I thought I just touched the wrong area of my neck, and I didn't think about it until later that night when I reached up again, and I found that area was now completely smooth. I thought, okay, maybe I'd just been messing with them too much and I caused them to swell a bit, and they no longer appear as tags, but instead of just bumps? I don't know. I am very strict on my skincare. I have an AM routine and a PM routine, and I bring it all the way down to my chest. Imagine my surprise as I was rubbing skincare into my neck, and I noticed 2 skin tags in the exact same spots, but on the left side of my neck. If they'd been there before, I would have noticed when I was putting on my skincare multiple times a day, but they had never been there before this evening. I was floored. My gasps were flabbered. I grabbed my magnifying mirror and I looked at both sides, and for a second, I even doubted my own reality, thinking that maybe I'd just gotten it mixed up. So I reached up with my left hand to touch them like I would normally with my right hand, and it just didn't feel right. Like, you know, when you're so used to doing things one way, that doing them a different way just feels way too different. It basically felt like I was trying to brush my teeth with the wrong hand, or something similar. And I have to really adjust my body to get my right hand in the correct spot to touch them the way that I did when they were on the right side. So it couldn't have been just me not remembering correctly. I'm sure people have much crazier stories than this one, and I'm sure people are gonna read this and think that I'm stupid, or have lost my mind, and honestly, maybe I have. I don't know. I'm in my 30s, married to an engineer, 3 kids, I'm a scientist by trade, which means I'm a huge skeptic. I own my home, like I'm just a normal person. But this shook me to my core. I don't drink or do any sort of drugs. I do take medication for seizures, and I have a heart condition, but neither of which are controlled substances or could cause any sort of confusion like this. I also checked all of my skincare products, and not a single one of them can be used to remove skin tags. Mine can only be removed via banding or freezing or snipping, so it definitely wasn't the ointments that I had been rubbing on them. I honestly feel pretty crazy right about now. The only thing that I can think of that would cause me to mix up something like this is if I had a pretty large seizure. Anytime that I've had one in the past, I would have pretty significant memory gaps. I am epileptic, but I haven't had a big seizure in at least 5 years now, and there's no signs that I've had one recently. I would have bitten my tongue, fallen and injured myself, dislocated a shoulder, or peed my pants, or whatever, and I would have been in an immense amount of pain for multiple days, and so there's just no way. Anyway, thank you for listening. It feels a lot better just to get this out into the void. And this person includes an edit that says, I did end up telling my husband, and he did confirm that they were indeed on my right side, and that he did certainly remember checking them out for me under his phone's flashlight when I said they were irritated a couple of weeks ago. Somebody else was in our room. This happened a few years ago. It was my first year in college. I was in this suite-style dorm, which is basically just 2 dorm rooms connected by a bathroom, and each dorm room has a door to the main hallway and then a door to the bathroom. My suite mates in the other dorm room never locked the door to the hallway, so I always made sure to lock my room's door to the bathroom so that people couldn't enter through their side and then break into my room. One day, I got home from class and I entered my room just as someone was walking into the bathroom and shutting the door behind them. My roommate, who shared the bedroom with me, was in class. I mean, I'd literally just walked past her on the other side of campus a few minutes prior, and my two suite mates weren't home either. So I immediately closed my door. I ran through the hallway to the suite mate's door and I opened it. They, of course, left it unlocked, and it took maybe 2 seconds. But nobody was there. No one was in the bathroom either. I tried to enter my room through the door that the person had just shut, but it was locked from inside the bedroom. And there's no way that they could have locked it after walking into the bathroom. Not a single thing in any of the 3 rooms was out of place, and I saw no evidence that anyone had been there. But I know for a fact that I saw someone walk into the bathroom, and I heard the door swing shut behind them. So now I'm just wondering, who was that? Where did they go? And what do I do now? Jacket took a trip. Last summer, I took my family on a cruise to Bermuda. I remember packing and looking at the weather. I packed a bunch of shorts and t-shirts, but also 2 pairs of nice pants and some collared shirts so my wife and I could do a nice dinner one night while my parents watched our 3-year-old. This wasn't my first cruise, so I knew that I may need a light jacket for the nighttime on the deck. I packed my quarter-zip pullover. It's from a fundraiser golf outing that my fraternity had a few years ago. There's maybe 60 in existence that are exactly like it. I packed it specifically over any other pullover because I've been lucky to run into fraternity brothers from chapters all over the country who can spot my letters on the jacket. I figured, why not on a cruise? We left Saturday afternoon from Manhattan. My wife and I picked Monday night to have our date, as it was the last night before we made it to Bermuda, and we wanted to make sure we didn't have reservations on other nights in case we were enjoying Bermuda and couldn't make it to the boat in time. It was cooler that night, so after getting my nice pants and my shirt on, I put my pullover on before we left for dinner. We walked to the ship a little and then decided to get our photos taken. I took my jacket off and I placed it on a chair in the photo studio. My wife placed her clutch on top of that. When we were done, we grabbed our stuff and we went to the restaurant. My jacket was placed on the back of my restaurant chair while we ate, and we enjoyed our dinner. Once we were finished, we headed back to our room where my parents had just put our son to sleep. We had drinks that we planned to enjoy on our balcony. This is when I realized I didn't have my jacket. I ran back to the restaurant, which was closing, and I asked if anyone had turned in a jacket. I showed them a picture of it, and they said no, but to check the lost and found at guest services. I did. I checked in with guest services, and they said they didn't have it either. I figured, okay, maybe it'll show up in a day or 2. I'll just wait it out. We went about our cruise, and I checked back on Wednesday night and again on Friday before we packed up. We dug through all of our laundry in our suitcases, and this jacket just is gone. I also didn't have any other jackets, so it wasn't like a mistake that I brought a different one. I also asked my parents and my sister and her husband if they saw it, and the answer was, again, no. Now I'm kind of mad because I thought somebody might have taken this thing. Unless they were in my fraternity, that would mean nothing to them. We got home, we unpacked, and we did our laundry. And of course, it was still nowhere to be found. About 4 months later, I was packing for a work trip, and I knew that I'd need a pullover. So when packing, I went to the area in our closet where I keep my pullovers, and there it was, hanging like it never left. I talked to my wife as we just got back from a different beach trip where I complained that I didn't have my pullover, And here it was now, staring me right in the face, in the one part of the closet where I keep all of my jackets. I asked her if she saw it come back from the cruise, and she swore up and down, no. She said, "I remember you taking it off at the restaurant on the cruise, and I haven't seen it since." And she would have said something because she knew how upset I was about losing it. She also said that she didn't see it go to the beach either, as at that point it was still gone. Let's add something to the No Way files. Just after 3 a.m. on August 7th, 1994, something started falling from the sky over the small town of Oakville, Washington. It wasn't rain, and it wasn't hail. It was this gelatinous, semi-translucent substance. It was sticky, formless, and it was unlike anything the people who saw it had ever encountered before. And that morning, nearly everyone who came into contact with these blobs that fell from the sky got sick. Oakville is a small town. At the time, it was about 600 people, and it was tucked between farmland and forest in western Washington. People there are very used to rain. It's part of life. But what came down that August morning didn't behave like water. Officer David Lacey was on patrol when the strange downpour started. His windshield started to smear instead of clearing when he wiped it with his windshield wipers, and when he pulled over at a gas station to clean it, he noticed that whatever was on his windshield was soft and sticky and almost jelly-like. He had to use his gloves to wipe all of it off, and not long after, he started to feel lightheaded. Elsewhere, in town, residents reported finding the blobs on sidewalks, on fences, and driveways, and some even found it inside their cars. Some reports even claimed that the blobs were coating entire roofs. It didn't have a smell, and it didn't appear to move at all once it finally hit the ground. But within hours, people everywhere were experiencing fatigue and nausea and dizziness. Among the first affected was Dottie Hearn. She was a local woman in her 60s who stepped outside to check the weather. She came back in, sat down, and very shortly after, she collapsed. She was taken to the hospital and diagnosed with a severe inner ear infection, but her symptoms didn't quite match. She hadn't been ill the day before. Something had changed, but no one could explain what or why. Over the next 3 weeks, the blobs returned, 6 times in total, and always in the same general area of Oakville. And each of the 6 times this happened, they all had the same characteristics, and they always followed by more reports of people getting sick. Residents said the flu-like symptoms came on fast and hard. People had fevers that spiked, animals and pets started becoming lethargic, and one kitten reportedly died after exposure. Even those who didn't come into direct contact with the blobs, but were still outside driving during the falls, said that they soon felt unwell after. Dottie's daughter, named Sunny Barclift, started to grow concerned, and she took samples of the substance to a local hospital for testing. The results were strange, to say the least. The lab techs said that the samples originally were reported to contain human white blood cells, and this should not have been possible. White blood cells simply don't survive outside of the body, at least not for long, and they certainly don't fall from the sky, but that's what the initial tests showed. Sunny then contacted the Washington State Department of Health, who conducted even more research and analysis. They said the substance contained 2 different types of bacteria, one that was commonly found in the human digestive system, and another that can cause infections in open wounds. But still, nobody could say how it got there, or what the blobs actually were. As word spread, so did speculation. Some people suggested that the blobs were aerosolized waste dumped from a commercial airplane. But the Federal Aviation Administration, the people in charge of dumping stuff from planes, investigated and they quickly dismissed that theory. The FAA requires all waste to be dyed blue, and nothing about the Oakville blobs matched that description. And besides, the FAA said that there had been no air traffic over Oakville at the times of the reported falls. Others proposed it was simply jellyfish remains from a military weapons test off of the Pacific coast, which was an idea born from the area's proximity to naval training sites. Some residents believed the U.S. military was experimenting with biological materials and accidentally released the blobs into the air. No hard evidence ever surfaced to support that theory, though. A microbiologist named Mike McDowell from AmTest Laboratories in Tacoma, Washington, received a sample from Sunny and conducted an independent analysis. He confirmed that the material was biological in nature and said that it appeared to contain cells that were eukaryotic, which means they had nuclei. That ruled out bacteria and pointed towards something a little more complex. Plant cells? Maybe animal cells? He couldn't say for sure, but he was confident in one thing, and that this wasn't a simple environmental contaminant. When he requested a follow-up sample to do more testing, he was told that it had been misplaced. And then after pressing back, he was told that the samples no longer existed. To this day, the Oakville blobs have never been conclusively identified. No laboratories ever released a final explanation, and the Department of Health never issued a public statement. No military agency admitted to any activity in the area, and there are no samples left to test, allegedly. The people who lived through it, including Officer Lacey and the entire Hearn family, still believe that what they saw and experienced was very real. They can remember the texture of the substance. They remember the sudden illnesses that everybody was subject to. And then they remember how the story simply disappeared from the news. For skeptics, the answer is a little bit simpler. Bad data, misread tests, environmental contamination, who knows, maybe even mass suggestion or overactive imaginations in a small town during a weird and boring summer. But if that's the case, it doesn't explain the repeat events, or why trained lab technicians consistently found biological signatures in all of the samples they tested, or why every agency that touched the case seemed to lose track of the physical evidence. And for those who were there, the explanation that they were waiting for, the one from a government lab or from some university researcher, never came. There are things in nature that we still don't fully understand. Obviously, we have strange weather patterns, chemical anomalies, airborne phenomena. But a lot of people think that what was dropped or what fell onto Oakville was something else entirely. It was sticky and gooey and translucent, and it made everybody sick. And it happened 6 times. To this day, it's still a mystery that clings to the edges of the Pacific Northwest, just like fog. All right, so check this out. My dog saw the same glitch that I did. This is only a small thing, but it still confuses the heck out of me, and I can't think of any explanation. I was playing fetch with my dog in my living room. I threw the ball, and she'd bring it back. I mean, you get it. My dog dropped the ball on my foot and waited while I leaned down to pick it up, and then I blinked, and that ball was gone. I quickly checked under the sofa, thinking that she might have just nudged it under there, or maybe I accidentally kicked it, but it was nowhere to be seen. My dog was still staring at the spot where she had dropped it just a second ago when it disappeared, and she looked just as confused as I was, and she started frantically jumping around looking for it. I scoured the whole room, which isn't very big, by the way, and we eventually found it on the opposite side of the room in the middle of the floor, even after I'd looked everywhere. We only had this one particular ball at the time, so we couldn't have mistaken it for another one. Like I said, this isn't particularly exciting, but I can't think of any explanation. My dog was just happy to at least have her ball back. A ball phased right through my floor. I was in my room, just tossing a ball into the air. It was one of those squishy, neato stress balls that barely bounce when they hit the ground. I dropped it by accident, and I went to grab it, but it was nowhere to be found. And I mean nowhere. I checked under my bed, under the dresser, and every corner of the room. I even looked in spots that logically it couldn't have rolled into. You know those stress balls that I'm talking about. They're not fast or bouncy, and my room's not even that big. After a solid 5 minutes of crawling around like I'd lost a diamond, I was seriously confused. Then, my brother, who had been watching and joking around the whole time, casually said, "What if it went in the vent?" We both laughed. I mean, it sounded ridiculous. But, just for fun, we went over to check, and it was in there, sitting inside the vent just clear as day. We both stared at this ball in shock, and the thing is, the vent cover was fully closed. It was in that position where nothing was going in or out. There was no way that that ball should have been able to get through. The vent slots were extremely narrow, way too small for a squishy ball to fall through on its own, and neither of us had touched it. We'd been in the same room the whole time. So, how did it get in there? It's like it phased or no-clipped through the floor and the metal itself. We stood there, sort of half laughing and half freaked out. It felt like the universe had glitched for a second, and I still can't explain it. The zipper on my jacket randomly appeared. Okay, this might not sound like it's a big deal, but it's extremely weird to me. I have this jacket that I wear all the time. It's a black zip-up. A few months ago, I remember when I was zipping up, the zipper broke. It didn't bother me as much because I usually just use it as a jacket anyway, and I hardly ever zip it up. Today, when I was getting dressed, the zipper randomly appeared as if it was never broken. To be honest, such things happen to me pretty often, but I always seem to brush them off thinking that I just remember it wrong. But I swear, I wear this jacket all the time, and the zipper broke pretty early on, so I've never zipped it up, but now, it's just back. Also, the way the zipper broke, it wasn't really possible to reattach the zipper manually. And when I look at the zipper now, it looks totally normal, as if there was never an issue at all. The reason that this is creeping me out so much is because I precisely remember it not having the zipper for months, and I wore this jacket like 3 days ago. What could this be? Two unusual coins randomly appear. Tonight, as I was packing up for a week-long dog/house-sitting gig, I had 2 coins appear out of nowhere. The first was a $50 coin from 1972 that was on my bed when I picked up the bag that I was packing. I just used the bag last week, and I checked all of the pockets when I cleared it out, so it's unlikely that it was hidden somewhere inside. And even weirder, I don't remember the last time I've even seen a $50 coin before this. I feel like it's been years at this point. The sheets were in the wash at the time, and it wasn't there when I set the bag down, so I'm having a hard time figuring out how this coin ended up on a bare mattress. To make things even weirder, when I went back to the closet to put away the hangers from the clothes that I had packed, there was a euro on the floor. I live in the States, and I've never been to Europe. So again, not a coin that I would generally see in my day-to-day, and I have no idea where it came from or how it ended up there. I'm not one to look gift coins in the mouth, if you will, but to have two show up seemingly out of thin air is kind of throwing me for a loop. Transported bolt at work today. Today, at work, I was taking an exhaust down off of a car, and I had a coworker there holding the pipe as I was unbolting it from the engine when I dropped one of the bolts. I know that I dropped the bolt because I felt it hit the top of my head, but I didn't think too much of it. You drop stuff all the time working on cars. I got the pipe unbolted, and the guy that was holding it for me carried it off because he was going to weld on it, and I looked down to gather up the dropped bolt, expecting it to be close by. When I didn't see the bolt right away, despite the floor being clear at least 10 feet in every direction, I got down on my knees to try and look under another car nearby, and that coworker looked back at me and asked if I had dropped a bolt. I said yeah, I was having a hard time finding it. Coworker said he didn't realize that I had dropped one because he never heard anything hit the ground. Armed with that, I began moving hoses and wires and stuff, thinking it must just be hung up in the engine compartment somehow, but I didn't see it there either. After looking for this thing for a good 3 or 4 minutes, I still hadn't found it, and I had walked some 20 feet away over to my toolbox to grab a light and continue my search. But when I got to the toolbox, the missing bolt was sitting right there on my toolbox, like it had been placed there sitting upright on its head. Somebody replies with a question, asking, well, was anyone else there who could have found it and simply put it away without you seeing? And the OP responds with, no. There were 2 guys in the way back of the shop who had no idea what was going on, and then just me and the other guy who was helping me. There's no way that bolt could have fallen off of that pipe, hit me in the head, and then ended up upright next to my toolbox, almost 20 feet away. What do you think that was? If you didn't already know, if you have your own glitchy or unexplainable experience that you'd like me to read, you can send it to DarekWeberSubmissions@gmail.com. This next story is a submission from a longtime viewer. They say, I would like to pose a question to those of you who believe that human beings are creatures of free will. What if you saw a disturbing glimpse of your future in a dream, and no matter how hard you tried to avoid it, you inadvertently caused it to happen that very day? Well, it happened to me, and it left me wondering whether or not we really do have any free will at all. When I was just a 12-year-old boy, before the advent of cell phones, or streaming media, or even the internet for that matter, I didn't know much about the paranormal and things of that nature. No, my biggest pursuits were comic books and collecting Hot Wheels and supporting my video game addiction over at the local arcade. So I got this little weekend job down at the swap meet helping out this old Chinese vendor named Chung. The job was simple. Meet Chung at the drive-in theater early on Saturday morning to help set up his vending spot with merchandise, which consisted of knockoff Gucci bags, pocketbooks, and assorted women's shoes, and then assisting him throughout the day. At the end of the day, Chung would hand me a nice, crispy $10 bill. I was making $20 a week, which in 1978 afforded me the latest issues of Mad Magazine and collectible Hot Wheels, as well as a shot at this new video game over at the arcade called Space Invaders. On one Friday night, I sat on the edge of my bed, I reached over, and I picked up my little alarm clock to set it for work the next morning. Swap meet vendors had to be there early so that they could set up and be ready to meet the throngs of shoppers coming in at 7:30 when the ticket gates opened. My alarm clock was this old vintage wind-up hand-me-down from my grandmother. I set the alarm hand for 5:30. I wound the clock spring and placed it back on my nightstand. I prided myself on being on time, which is a characteristic that was instilled in me from the time I learned to work for my own money. I was a young man of morals and integrity, and I had the world by the horns, or so I thought. I put on my pajamas and I laid my work clothes out on the chair, and then I tucked myself in for the night. I must have slept extremely well that night. We're talking deep REM sleep. Time seemed to no longer exist. And then I had a very lucid dream. It went something like this. I'm walking through a door, and there, about 30 to 35 feet in front of me, was my boss, Chung, squatting down in front of his vendor's stall that was completely set up, with the purses and the handbags hanging from hooks on the shade structure, and tables festooned with colorful tablecloths loaded up with pocketbooks, coin purses, and other accessories. He was straightening a pair of red shoes that he had arranged on the tarmac. I had missed setup. I was suddenly flushed with the realization that I was late for work. That feeling of pure anxiety washed over me like a bucket of ice-cold water. I stood frozen and speechless as Chung looked over his shoulder and spotted me. He nodded his head with a grin and started to speak, but the sound that came out wasn't his voice. It was a loud, steady, ringing sound like a bell. Suddenly, I was ripped from my dream, and I bolted upright in my bed to the sound of my alarm clock going off. It was 5:30, and it was now time to get ready for work. I reached over and turned it off, and then I rubbed my eyes, anxious with that feeling of being late that lingered with repeating visions from that stupid dream. I felt like I had just closed my eyes, only to be rudely awakened again. I shrugged it off, and I went to the bathroom to begin my morning ritual for work. But the dream kept replaying itself over and over in my head, like a 10-second video clip just stuck on a loop. The finished displays, the red shoes at the bottom, that grin on Chung's face, and the feeling of being late. I just couldn't shake it despite the fact that I had gotten up on time and there was nothing standing in the way of me actually being on time for work that morning. Nonetheless, I picked up my pace a little bit just to make sure that that dream playing out over and over again and that feeling of dread that comes with showing up late for work would just go away. I felt a bit silly as I donned my clothes a little quicker and tied my old suede wallabies a little faster than I normally would. This is ludicrous, I thought to myself. There's no way I can be late. If anything, I'll actually be super early. I cut the time that I would normally spend getting ready to go to work in half by skipping breakfast, and I set out on foot at 6 in the morning in the chilly morning darkness toward the drive-in theater that waited for me about a block and a half away from my house. The light of dawn wouldn't break for another half hour or so, and, as it had been all season, my job was to show up around 7 a.m., meet Chung at our spot, and we would knock out the setup by 7:30, just in time for the shoppers to be allowed in. But this time, it would be a little different. I thought to myself as I shuffled down my empty street toward the quiet main thoroughfare. Ignoring the crosswalk, I jogged across the 4-lane thoroughfare toward the main gate of the drive-in theater with its landmark screen towering in the distance. The dream quickened my pace. I scoffed, and I fought the urge just to break out into a full sprint. It was unusually foggy that morning too, as the street lamps created this halo of swirling mist that struck my imagination as some ominous interdimensional portal. And that damn dream. That dream was still fresh on my mind as I entered the gate and waved at the security guard leaning in the doorframe of his guard shack. He recognized me, and with a nod of his head, he let me pass. His face was half lit by one single incandescent light bulb from within. He pulled the cigarette from his lips with his thumb and his forefinger, and he left out a puff of thick gray smoke, and he asks, "You're a little early, aren't you?" I shook my head and I shoved my hands in my pockets as I thought about how ridiculous it was for me to be here at this hour. I mean, there was literally nobody there except for me, the security guard, and the cafe crew at the center of the drive-in lot. I headed straight for my spot. I needed to get my head on right, and I needed a cup of coffee and an old-fashioned glazed donut. I did skip breakfast after all. I walked into the cafe and up to the service counter. The place was completely empty except for the bleary-eyed workers who were busy doing their morning prep for the coming rush of customers. Their day starts a lot earlier than mine, I reckoned, as I took in the aroma of fresh coffee and baked donuts. I ordered my cup of coffee and an old-fashioned glazed donut with a $2 bill, and I got 2 quarters back. I really could not wait to sink my teeth into the comfort that old timeless favorite would bring me. Through large windows, I could see a panoramic view of the outside area. I spotted a booth right next to the window, one that was close enough to the entrance so that I could notice when Chung arrived, and I could go out to greet him early. I really felt foolish as I stirred the sugar and the powdered creamer in, and I chuckled to myself as the dream faded. My senses were now preoccupied by the taste of fresh coffee and the flavor of that old-fashioned glazed delicacy. About halfway through my cup of coffee, I glanced at my watch. It was 7 o'clock. It's about the time that I would normally show up, and the vendors were now rapidly arriving en masse, claiming their spots. The clinking and clanking of their shade structure poles reverberated throughout the drive-thru as they got busy unloading their vehicles and setting up their vending stalls. I stared blankly at our spot, and it was empty. I thought, that's strange. No Chung. Something was not right. The spaces on both sides of our spot were already busy with their vendors and their helpers, skillfully fastening leg poles to corner pieces and stretching those canvas tarps with bungee cords down for shade. I stepped outside to use the payphone that was mounted on the wall next to the restroom. I figured I'd call Chung at home to see if he was there, but the payphone was out of order. By now, the light of dawn was just beginning to illuminate the cloudless sky, and the fog that had invaded the early morning was gone. And so was Chung. I played with my empty coffee cup and I considered a second round. Why not? If Chung didn't show up by the time I finished my second cup, I reasoned, then I guess he'd be considered a no-show. Heck, I could just go home and crawl back into bed for a few more hours before the rest of my family started to rise. Godzilla and Kung Fu reruns on Saturday morning? Yeah, dude, just what the doctor ordered. Sitting back down at my booth with a fresh cup of hot coffee on my last 50 cents, I looked over at our spot again, and it was still completely vacant, with occupants on either side busily arranging their goods for display for the shoppers that would soon be flooding in. There were folding tables beneath the shade structures displaying everything from fashion and underwear to car stereos and kids' toys. An entire sea of shade structures, tarps, goods with cargo vans and box trucks, and just about anything that you could haul stuff in had materialized across the tarmac of the drive-in theater as far as the eye could see. If you've ever been to a swap meet, then you know what I'm talking about. It was now 7:30. Showtime. Well, I guess that's it, I thought to myself as I stood up and finished the last sip from my coffee cup. That whole dream was, well, just a dream. I was now free to go home and catch some shut-eye and to decompress from an otherwise stressful episode. I headed for the exits on the other side of the cafe. Beyond the cafe was my home, less than just a couple blocks away. Through the windows on that side, I could see the shoppers starting to flow in from the ticket line and fan out through the aisles of waiting vendors. I grabbed the doorknob and I pushed it outward, and then I felt a strange rush of, like, deja vu or something come over me. This can't be. I struggled to reason as I walked out the door and I saw him. I was back in that damn dream, and I was late. I gazed in this existential horror at Chung, who was squatted about 35 feet in front of me. He was straightening a pair of brightly polished red shoes on display on the tarmac. And my jaw went slack as my coffee cup fell from my numb fingers. Chung? Chung looked over his shoulder in my direction. He had just finished setting up his stall. Every detail from my dream was there in front of me in real life now. The handbags that were hanging to the accessory tables and brightly colored tablecloths. His eyes met mine, and then he said with a sheepish grin, "Oh, there you are. I forgot to tell you last weekend, I switched spots." Glitch in the Spider-Verse. A week ago, I was tidying up a shelf at my work, and I found a huge jumping spider scurrying around up there. I decided to capture him and put him back outside, so I got a cup and a paper, and I managed to catch it, which honestly was no easy feat, as that dude was fast. Of course, as soon as I caught him under the cup, I had to walk away for a second to attend to a very quick work thing. I come back, not even a minute later, and peeked under the cup, but there's no spider. I lifted up the cup and I looked inside. No spider inside either, and he's not on the paper. I start frantically looking all over the shelf area again and on the ground below, and I can't find this spider. I call my assistant over, and she also looks in the cup and around the area, and she also can't find the spider. Now, this is not ideal, but it's okay. I guess it got away. I put the cup upside down on the paper on the shelf in case it shows up again so I can be ready. The remainder of my workday passes, and I never see it, so I go home. I come into work the next morning, and my two other coworkers say, "Hey, did you really leave a spider for us to deal with?" I, of course, apologize and explain that I tried to catch one yesterday, but it somehow escaped the cup that I put it in when I walked away for less than a minute, and then I couldn't find it. And then they explained to me that the spider was inside of the upside-down cup this morning on that shelf. They thought I had left trash up there, and when they went to throw it away for me, the spider comes jumping out at them at full speed. I looked inside that cup yesterday. My assistant looked inside that cup too, and there was no spider. Now, I know spiders like a good hidey hole, but I've never seen a spider lift up a cup and go inside before. How? Where was it? Either there's a new type of spider that can camouflage like some sort of octopus or something, or it glitched in and out of existence for at least 2 minutes. Luckily, my assistant corroborated my story, so I don't look completely insane. But we're both still scratching our heads about it. This is the No Way Files. In 1958, a young girl in England pointed to a birthmark on her sister's forehead and said, "That's where she got hit." Her parents froze because no one had told the girls what happened before they were born. They were only 4 years old and they'd never been to that part of town. They'd never met the girls who died, but somehow they remembered everything. To understand what happened, you have to go back 1 year prior to 1957 in the town of Hexham in Northumberland. John and Florence Pollock had 2 daughters, Joanna, age 11, and Jacqueline, age 6. They were inseparable. They were bright, imaginative, and often dressed in matching clothes. Jacqueline, the younger one, had a small scar on her forehead from a fall, and both girls had strong personalities. Joanna, the older sister, was a thoughtful girl. Jacqueline was ever so bold. On May 7th, a woman, under the influence of barbiturates, which is basically a medicine that causes relaxation, some drowsiness, and reduced anxiety, drove her car onto the sidewalk. She struck 3 children that were walking to church. Joanna and Jacqueline were both killed, and so was their friend, Anthony. The accident devastated the Pollock family. Florence, in particular, spiraled into grief, but John, a devout Catholic with a growing interest in reincarnation, became convinced that his daughters would return. Florence, however, did not share his belief. Until the following year. In October of 1958, Florence gave birth to twin girls, Jillian and Jennifer. They were identical twins, but with small differences. Jennifer had a birthmark on her forehead, in the same spot where Jacqueline had her car. She also had a second birthmark on her waist, matching one Jacqueline had in the same location. There was no family history of twins, and the odds of identical twins each having matching moles and scars to their deceased sisters was, at the very least, statistically unusual. Still, Florence tried not to read into it. And then the girls started talking. When the twins were about 3 years old, they began to ask for toys that had belonged to Joanna and Jacqueline, toys that they had never seen before. And the toys they were asking for weren't just dolls or balls or whatever. They asked for their specific names. Florence had boxed up the old toys after the accident. She quietly brought them out one day to see what the girls would do. Jillian immediately claimed Joanna's old doll. Jennifer reached for Jacqueline's. There was no hesitation, and there was no prompting by mom or dad. One day, the family walked past a school that Joanna and Jacqueline had attended, and the twins, who had never been there before, pointed at it and said that was their school. They also identified a park where the older girls used to play. Jennifer once even said, "That's where we fell." However, the most disturbing moment came when Florence overheard the girls playing one afternoon. Jillian was holding Jennifer's head and said, "The blood's coming out of your eyes. That's where the car hit you." Florence didn't know what to say. The girls had never been told how their sisters died, and no one had ever described the injuries. Not to them, not to anyone their age. As the twins got older, the memories began to fade. By the time the twins were 5, they stopped referencing their late sisters, Joanna and Jacqueline. They no longer remembered the school, or the toys, or the accident. And they lived normal lives. They grew up, became adults, and later said that they remembered nothing about those early conversations, except for what their parents told them years later. But Florence and John had kept journals, and so had Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist and researcher from the University of Virginia who visited the family multiple times in the 1960s. Stevenson had spent years documenting children who claimed to have past lives. He published several books on the subject, always careful to distinguish between anecdote and documentation. Documentation. What's a documentation? He believed the Pollock case was among one of the most compelling. One, for the memories, and also for the birthmarks. He later wrote, "If reincarnation is a fact, the Pollock twins may offer some of the best evidence in the Western world." Now, of course, there are logical explanations. For example, some say the girls might have just overheard conversations that their parents had, that the memories were planted through suggestion, that the parents, especially John, the father, who believed very strongly in reincarnation, influenced them without realizing it. But that doesn't explain the timing, or the specific naming of the toys, or the birthmarks, or the identifications of the school, or the scar. And none of that explains why the girls, once aware, slowly seemed to forget. Jillian and Jennifer grew into adulthood and lived separate lives. They didn't make a career out of the story, and in fact, they rarely even spoke about it, but they never denied it either. They knew what their parents said happened, and they didn't dispute it. It could have been imagination, or suggestion, or a parent's grief shaping the story of a new beginning. But if it wasn't, then it might mean that something came back, just for a little while, to be remembered.